This is day 142 of the Daily Bread Bible Study for Thursday, May 21st, 2020, focusing on Nehemiah chapters 4 through 7. So we continue in the story of the cupbearer for King Artaxerxes of Persia. And we see that Nehemiah in chapter 4, that there is some opposition. Not everyone is excited that he is instructing and leading the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite mock the efforts to build up the wall. Upon seeing the Jews succeeding, Sanballat and Tobiah plot with the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites, so Ashdod being a place in Philistia, one of the 5 great cities of the Philistines. And so they seek to gather together those oppositional forces to fight with the workers and the Jews who are building the walls. With prayers to God, the Jews respond by sending weaponized guards out. So they equip guards, and each worker then carries materials in one hand and a weapon in the other. So I imagine the process goes much slower, but they are prepared for an ambush. So Nehemiah chapter 5 moves on, and a complaint rises up against Nehemiah that the nobles and officials have charged interest to their brethren, and thus they've created a cycle of debt that has led to the nobles and officials taking away land and enslaving other Jews. Nehemiah knows God's/Moses' command from Exodus. It's 2-part here. First, Exodus 22:25 says, "If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you shall not deal with them as a creditor. You shall not exact interest from them." And then the second is Exodus 21:2, "When you buy a male Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, but in the 7th he shall go out a free person without debt." And so we see here that the nobles of the Jews are kind of acting contrary to the law of the Lord. And so thus Nehemiah says to the nobles and officials in Nehemiah 5:10, "Let us stop this taking of interest. Restore to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, their houses, and the interest on money, grain, wine, and oil that you have been exacting from them." Nehemiah cares about the well-being of his people, and also notes that he does not act like the rulers who have come before him. It says Nehemiah 5:15, "The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people, and took food and wine with them, besides 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people, but I did not do so, because of the fear of the Lord." Nehemiah knows the law, asks nobles and officials to obey the law, and he himself wants to obey the law, to be a good governor and somebody who is appointed for this task of building up the walls. He wants to stay true to that and make sure that the people are taken care of, which is the whole purpose of doing this. He could come and be a dictator in this area, but that's not his goal. His goal is to serve, and to serve his people in rebuilding Jerusalem. Now, when the walls were complete in chapter 6, Nehemiah perceived treason from his enemies still. These enemies are not going away. Led by Sanballat and Geshem the Arab, they seek to tell King Artaxerxes a story in which Nehemiah leads the Jews in rebellion as their king. Nehemiah denies this claim and encourages the people to continue working on the walls of Jerusalem. The cohort of enemies then hire a Jew to make Nehemiah seem like a coward, saying, "There are people coming to take your life. Go hide in the temple." Because they will not want to take his life in the temple for fear and risk of bringing down God's wrath upon them. But Nehemiah refuses to take the bait. We learn that the wall is in fact completed, and that Tobiah actually had many people in Judah, quote unquote, bound by oath to him. And he was trying to use the nobles of Judah to get rid of Nehemiah. So all this, the actions of the nobles are definitely influenced by this Ammonite influencer named Tobiah. And so we see Nehemiah bringing this restoration of what God is about, holding people to the law of God, and encouraging them to obey not the laws of some corrupt individual there in Jerusalem who's an outsider, Tobiah the Ammonite official, but to listen to what God has to say and follow the law. This will be important next time as we see the coming of Ezra accounted here in Nehemiah as well. But in Nehemiah 7, upon completion of his appointed task by King Artaxerxes, Nehemiah appoints his brother Hanani in his stead, and he calls Hananiah to command the citadel. He instructs the gatekeepers to be armed and ready for opening up the gates of the city when the sun is high, so as to avoid ambushes again and to protect the people. And Jerusalem may have, a couple gates, but the city is underinhabited by the Jews. There's a lot of land, but just not a lot of people in it, and the city has not been built up with houses yet. So citizens of Jerusalem are appointed as supplemental guards to fill the need for protecting the place. We then see a list of returned exiles, including those that we mentioned in Ezra chapter 2. Notable names include Zerubbabel, who was mentioned previously in Ezra as a governor, Yeshua, who was mentioned as a priest, and Mordecai. He's an official mentioned upcoming in the book of Esther. And so Nehemiah 7:37 completes this section of Nehemiah and his action with, so the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, and some of the people, the temple servants, and all Israel settled in their towns. And thus we see Nehemiah has completed the work on the wall, and life is good. The Jews have Jerusalem back and are trying to live again in Jerusalem. And so the exile, though it's happened, though it's been rough, and the world after it is different. It's a new set of normal. It's not, just like the old normal where there's nobody else in Jerusalem and there's, don't have to respond to any of the bids of the king that would be made to Jerusalem, but they at least are able to be back in their homes and worship in their temple, and that is something to give thanks for. So we'll see more about this, wrapping up Nehemiah next time.